there was a survey from YouGov in 2020, which collected data from a representative sample of Americans. And when they broke the data down by income category, the highest income Americans were the most in support of defunding the police. Um, and you also saw this, like, there were surveys out of like Minneapolis and New York and Detroit, and found that white Democrats were the most supportive of defunding the police, and Black and Hispanic residents were far less in favor of it. They were like less likely to be in support of it. Um, and things like obsession with inequality versus poverty. There was a study which found that U.S. graduates of college were more concerned with reducing inequality, whereas people with only a high school diploma were more concerned with reducing poverty.
Mm,
Um, and so, like, inequality is like in and of itself. I'm not, I don't necessarily think it's like the worst thing in the world. It's like it's poverty that's the issue. Like people who don't have enough to eat, or they don't have shelter, or they don't have clothes. But inequality is like this buzzword, and I think a lot of that, it stems from sort of upper middle class people who are angry that they're not in the 1%. They're only in the top 10%, so
mm,
they're at the 90th percentile, but they're jealous of the people in the top 1%.
right,
um, they're the whatever, the sons and daughters of millionaires who are mad that there aren't in a family of billionaires. um,
right.
and a lot of the yeah, anyway, so luxury beliefs idea. Another study that I found interesting, that definitely reflected what I saw on campus and I still see at elite university campuses when I visit, is um, two different studies, one in 2020 and one in 2021, found that upper class Americans are more, they desire status more than lower class Americans.
Mm,
Essentially, there's a sort of an inverse correlation. The higher status and the more wealth someone has, the more likely they are to desire status and to desire more wealth. Um, which is
mm,
kind of counterintuitive. You might think that people at the bottom of society would be the most likely to desire status and wealth, but actually, when researchers collected objective measures of wealth and status, so level of education, occupational prestige, earnings, and so on, people who were at or near the top of those different metrics were the most likely to agree with statements like, it would please me to be in a position of power over others, or I enjoy having influence over other people, or I would like to, basically exert my desires on others. Um, and this makes sense. I mean, when you interact with a lot of people who are actually objectively speaking doing very well in their lives, but there's this very strong sort of social comparison orientation where they're constantly looking upward. Like,
mm,
yeah, they're doing
mm,
well, but they don't have the internship or the job or the amount of money that they think they should have compared to those around them, and this can fuel a lot of envy. And so the luxury beliefs idea was born out of this, that at a certain point, it became a bit gauche to exhibit your status in society with material goods alone. It's still, people still do it to a certain extent, but not as much as in the past. Um, I cited a book um, from Thorstein Veblen, The Theory of the Leisure Class, and I quote some bits of it in my book. And Veblen wrote his book in 1899, and he described how, the upper class of his day, basically you could tell right away from looking at people who was rich and who was poor. The rich would wear tuxedos and evening gowns and top hats, and you could just visibly tell right away, oh, that person's rich based on how they're dressed and their appearance. Whereas today, it's less true. If you walk around the street of any major city, it's not necessarily clear who the richest people are. Um, and so then by the middle of the 20th century, there was a French sociologist named Pierre Bourdieu who wrote a book called Distinction, A Social Critique of the Judgment of Taste. And he basically, he had this framework. He coined this term, cultural capital. He basically wrote about how the affluent will convert economic capital into cultural capital. So they'll take their money and then spend it in ways to perform their class status through intricate and expensive tastes and habits. And, at that point in the mid 20th century, learning a lot about wine or art or furniture or kind of these arcane areas of knowledge and the vocabulary of how to communicate it in a sophisticated way that would exhibit class. Today, people still do that to some extent, but now my claim is that you're not really learning those things as much anymore in elite universities. You're not really learning whatever the intricacies of the great books or about poetry or wine or art or those kinds of things. I mean, you can if you want, but really the message that you absorb from the institutions that train the future ruling class is like political correctness of like how to communicate about certain groups, which terminology to use, how to communicate about them, um, how to sort of exhibit in a sophisticated way that you are a supporter of this movement or that movement, uh, and at the right time. And when people ask why, you're able to sort of enumerate the reasons for it. And this is a costly indicator of your social position. If you're able to express luxury beliefs and then express them in the right way, you're basically sub-communicating. I went to an expensive college. I spent time around a lot of other educated people. I have the kind of job where I can, sit around and whatever, like scroll social media, and I listen to the right podcasts and get my information from the right legacy institutions, and I read the right bestsellers, and I know, what how to communicate and what to think about the issues of the day. That was another shocking thing about college too, was just how obsessed people are with like being informed. And I know you're a journalist or a recovering journalist or I don't know, but I know
Sort of
like
both.
and I respect like good journalists and good journalism, but it was just like such a shock to me. Like it was a culture shock for me because where I grew up, like the news wasn't really that big. People cared about local news. People kind of cared what was going on in our town,
Yeah.
but being informed about like global events and what was going on politically and having an opinion about everything that was occurring, or
Mm,
keeping up with the latest fashionable op-eds or this big splashy piece in the Atlantic or whatever. I had done it before. I went to college and suddenly it's like it's pervasive, and I'm like, oh, like this is another element of class that goes under discussed. You mentioned before how
yeah,
people think of class as being about money. It's like, you can win the lottery, but that doesn't necessarily mean you join the upper class. You're still
right.
going to be the class you're in. You just have $1 million now. But if you want to join the upper class or have your children join the upper class, you have to perform the class mannerisms and express the right tastes and views and so on.